I never thought a 4-foot pile of snow would turn me into a neighborhood legend, but here we are. My name is Vincent Fowler, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Buffalo, New York for 6 years. Buffalo gets snow. Everyone knows this. It is what we do. We shovel, we plow, we survive, and we go about our business. The winter of 2025 brought us one of those legendary storms that people talk about for years afterward. 3 feet fell in 48 hours, and the temperature dropped so low that everything froze solid. My driveway looked like a ski slope, and my property line was buried under massive drifts that the city plows had graciously deposited while clearing the street. I spent 2 full days clearing my driveway. My back ached, my fingers were numb despite the heavy gloves, and I had gone through enough hot chocolate to fill a bathtub. The snow had to go somewhere, and like every other homeowner on my street, I piled it along the edges of my property. The pile on my front lawn grew to about 4 feet high, maybe 5 in some spots where the drifts had been particularly nasty. It was not pretty, but it was functional and it would melt eventually. This is Buffalo. Everyone does this. It is normal. Except apparently, it was not normal enough for Brenda Patterson. Brenda was the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, and she took her role more seriously than most people take their actual jobs. She was 52 years old, had short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screams, "I want to speak to the manager." And she drove a white Lexus SUV that she kept immaculately clean, even in the worst weather. I had seen her at HOA meetings before, watching her brandish the community bylaws like they were holy scripture. Most of the time, I kept my head down and paid my dues on time, hoping to avoid her radar. That changed on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, working from home and enjoying my second cup of coffee when my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone, and the roads were still pretty rough despite the plowing efforts. When I opened the door, Brenda stood there in a puffy white coat, black boots that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and an expression that could have frozen the already frozen snow. "Vincent Fowler?" she asked, though she knew exactly who I was. "That is me," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "What can I do for you, Brenda?" She held up a manila folder like she was serving me legal papers. "I am here on official HOA business. Your property is currently in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Meadowbrook Heights Community Standards regarding snow removal and aesthetic maintenance." I stared at her. "I am sorry, what?" "The snow piles on your front lawn exceed the acceptable height limit of 2 feet and create an unsightly appearance that degrades the visual appeal of our community." She said this without a hint of irony, as if she was reading from a script she had memorized. "Brenda, we just got 3 feet of snow. Where exactly am I supposed to put it?" "That is not the HOA's concern. The bylaws are clear. You have 72 hours to remove the excess snow from your property, or you will be subject to fines." She pulled a paper from the folder and handed it to me. It was an official notice, printed on HOA letterhead, detailing my supposed violation and the potential penalties. I looked at the paper, then at her, then at the massive snow piles that lined every single house on the street. "You are kidding, right? Everyone has snow piles." "Are you fining the entire neighborhood? Other properties are being reviewed," she said stiffly. "Your violation was the most egregious and was therefore prioritized." "Most egregious? My pile is the same size as everyone else's, Mr. Fowler. I do not have time to debate this. The notice has been issued. You have 72 hours. She turned on her heel and walked back to her Lexus, which was parked at the curb with the engine running. I stood there in the cold, holding the paper, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger rising in my chest. I went back inside and read the notice more carefully. According to the document, I was facing a fine of $500 if I did not comply within the specified time frame. $500 for snow in Buffalo. In February, I called my neighbor Marcus, who lived 3 houses down. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Vincent, what is up? Did Brenda Patterson just hit you with a snow violation notice?" There was a pause. "A what?" The HOA. "Did she fine you for having too much snow on your lawn?" "No, man, I have not heard anything." "Why did she get you?" "She just left my house. Apparently my snow pile is too high and I have 72 hours to fix it or pay $500. Marcus laughed, then realized I was serious. "Wait, for real? That is insane. Everyone has snow piles right now." "That is what I said." "She told me I was being prioritized because my violation was the most egregious." "That is garbage. Your pile is not any bigger than mine." We talked for a few more minutes, and Marcus promised to ask around the neighborhood to see if anyone else had been targeted. I spent the rest of the morning fuming and trying to work, but I could not concentrate. The notice sat on my kitchen counter, mocking me. By that evening, Marcus called me back. "I talked to 6 other people on our street. Nobody else got a notice. It is just you." "Just me." "Why would she single me out?" "No idea, man, but this is pretty messed up." I thought back over the past few months, trying to remember if I had done anything to get on Brenda's bad side. The only thing I could think of was the last HOA meeting, where she had proposed increasing the annual dues by 30% to fund some ridiculous decorative fountain project. I had voted against it, along with a handful of other homeowners, but the measure had passed anyway. Maybe she was the type to hold grudges. That night, I went online and dug into the HOA bylaws. Section 12, paragraph 4 did mention snow removal, but the language was vague. It talked about maintaining reasonable aesthetic standards and ensuring that snow accumulation does not create hazardous or unsightly conditions. There was no specific mention of a 2-foot height limit. Brenda had apparently made that up or interpreted the rules in the most ridiculous way possible. I took photos of my snow pile, then walked up and down the street taking photos of everyone else's piles. They were all roughly the same size, some even bigger than mine. I documented everything, creating a folder of evidence in case I needed to fight this. The next morning, I called the HOA office and asked to speak with Brenda. Her assistant, a timid-sounding woman named Linda, told me that Brenda was unavailable but that I could leave a message. "Tell her Vincent Fowler called. I want to discuss the violation notice I received." "I will pass that along, Mr. Fowler." Brenda never called me back. By Thursday, I was angrier than I had been in years. The 72-hour deadline was approaching, and I had not heard a word from the HOA. I decided to go to the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for that Saturday evening at the community center. The Meadowbrook Heights Community Center was a small brick building at the entrance to our subdivision. It had a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people, though the monthly HOA meetings rarely drew more than a dozen. When I arrived on Saturday, there were 8 other homeowners already seated, along with Brenda and the 4 other board members. Gary, a retired accountant, Susan, a realtor, Tom, who worked in IT, and Jennifer, a school teacher. Brenda sat at the head of the table, shuffling papers and looking very self-important. When she saw me walk in, her expression tightened slightly, but she did not say anything. I took a seat near the front and waded through the usual boring agenda items: budget updates, landscaping contracts, and a lengthy discussion about whether the community should switch to LED streetlights. Finally, during the open forum section at the end, I raised my hand. Brenda looked at me like I was a bug she wanted to squash. Yes, Mr. Fowler, I stood up, holding the violation notice. I want to talk about this. You fined me $500 for having snow on my lawn, snow that is the same size as everyone else's. Snow that is unavoidable after a 3-foot blizzard. I want to know why I was singled out and what exactly I am supposed to do about it. There were murmurs from the other homeowners. A few people turned to look at me with sympathy. Brenda cleared her throat. As I explained when I delivered the notice, your property was in violation of our community standards. The bylaws are clear. The bylaws do not mention a 2-foot limit, I said, pulling out a printed copy of Section 12. You made that up. Her face flushed. I did not make anything up. The board has the authority to interpret the bylaws as needed to maintain community standards. So you are interpreting them in a way that lets you fine me, but nobody else, for something that is completely normal in Buffalo in February. Your snow pile is larger than the others, she insisted. I have photos that prove otherwise. I pulled out my phone and started showing pictures to the other homeowners. Look, here is my pile. Here is Marcus's pile 3 houses down. Here is the one across the street. They are all the same. Gary, the retired accountant, leaned forward to look at the photos. Brenda, these do look pretty similar. The decision has been made, Brenda said sharply. Mr. Fowler was in violation and the fine stands unless he removes the excess snow. And where exactly am I supposed to put it? I demanded. It is snow in Buffalo in February. There is nowhere for it to go. It will melt in a few weeks. That is not the HOA's problem. I could feel my temper rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I am requesting a formal appeal of this fine. The bylaws allow for that, right? Brenda looked annoyed. Yes, you can submit a written appeal to the board and we will review it at the next meeting. Fine. I will do that. The meeting ended shortly after, and several homeowners came up to me to express their support. One woman, an older lady named Dorothy, told me she thought Brenda was on a power trip and that someone needed to stand up to her. That made me feel a little better, but I was still stuck with a $500 fine and a pile of snow I could not do anything about. I spent Sunday drafting my appeal, citing the vague language in the bylaws, the photographic evidence showing that my snow pile was no different from anyone else's, and the general absurdity of fining someone for snow accumulation in a city that gets an average of 95 inches per year. I submitted it to the HOA office on Monday morning. The 72-hour deadline passed. On Wednesday, I received a second notice in the mail, informing me that I was now subject to the $500 fine, plus a late penalty of $50 for each additional week that the violation remained uncorrected. The letter also mentioned that continued non-compliance could result in a lien being placed on my property. A lien. Over snow. I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Monahan, and she specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I found her through an online search and booked a consultation for that Friday. Her office was in downtown Buffalo, in a sleek high-rise with a view of Lake Erie. Patricia was in her mid-40s, sharply dressed, and no nonsense. I explained the situation, showed her the notices, the bylaws, and my photographic evidence. She listened carefully, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. HOAs can be tricky. They do have a lot of power, but they also have to follow their own rules. From what you are showing me, it looks like Brenda Patterson is interpreting the bylaws in a way that is not supported by the actual text. So I have a case. You have an argument. Whether it is worth pursuing depends on how far you want to take this. You can fight the fine, but it might cost you more in legal fees than the fine itself. Alternatively, you could try to work with the board to resolve this informally. I already tried. She would not even return my phone call. Patricia nodded. Then your options are to pay the fine and move on, or fight it formally. If you fight it, I can draft a letter to the HOA outlining your position and the legal issues with their interpretation. That might be enough to get them to back down. If not, you could take it to mediation or even file a lawsuit, though that would be expensive and time-consuming. I thought about it. $500 was not going to bankrupt me, but the principle of the thing made my blood boil. Brenda was abusing her power, and if I let her get away with it, she would just keep doing it to other people. Let us start with the letter, I said. Patricia drafted a strongly worded letter to the HOA board, citing the vague language in the bylaws, the lack of evidence that my snow pile was any different from my neighbor's, and the potential for legal action if the fine was not rescinded. She sent it via certified mail, and I received confirmation that Brenda signed for it on the following Tuesday. For a few days, I heard nothing. Then on Thursday, I got a call from Linda, the HOA assistant. Mr. Fowler, Brenda asked me to let you know that your appeal has been reviewed and denied. The fine stands. She did not even wait for the next board meeting, I said, furious. I am just passing along the message, sir. I called Patricia immediately. They denied my appeal without even holding a hearing. That is a procedural violation, Patricia said. The bylaws require appeals to be reviewed at a board meeting with the opportunity for the homeowner to present their case. If they skip that step, we have grounds to challenge the process. What do? I will send another letter, this time pointing out the procedural violation and demanding that they follow their own rules. If they refuse, we can consider escalating. The back and forth continued for another 2 weeks. Patricia sent letters. The HOA responded with increasingly hostile and dismissive replies, and my frustration grew. Meanwhile, the weather started to warm up slightly, and the snow piles around the neighborhood began to melt. My pile shrank from 4 feet to 3 feet, then to 2 feet. By early March, it was mostly gone, just like I had said it would be, but the fine remained. In fact, the HOA added another late penalty, bringing the total to $600. I was done playing nice. One evening, I was venting to Marcus over beers at a local bar. I just do not get it, I said. Why is she so obsessed with this? The snow is almost gone. What is the point? Marcus shook his head. She is a control freak, man. She gets off on this stuff. I wish I could just dump all the snow on her lawn and see how she likes it. Marcus laughed. That would be amazing. Too bad it is almost melted. His words stuck with me. That night I lay in bed thinking about snow, HOA rules, and Brenda Patterson's smug face. An idea began to form in my mind. It was petty, probably a little crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. Buffalo was forecast to get another major storm the following week. A nor'easter was moving up the coast, and meteorologists were predicting another 12 to 18 inches. If that happened, I would have plenty of snow to work with. The storm hit on a Wednesday night. I stayed up late, watching the snow fall in thick, heavy flakes. By morning, there was a fresh blanket of white covering everything. The city plows came through around dawn, and once again, they deposited huge piles of snow along the curb. I waited until mid-morning, then I got to work. First, I cleared my driveway just like before. But this time, instead of piling the snow on my lawn, I loaded it into my pickup truck. I made trip after trip, shoveling snow into the truck bed, driving it a few blocks away and dumping it. Not on Brenda's lawn, that would be too obvious, but on the streets around the HOA office and the homes of the other board members. It was exhausting work. My back screamed in protest, and my arms felt like noodles, but I kept going. I dumped load after load of snow onto the public streets near the community center, creating massive piles that blocked half the road. I strategically placed snow at the end of Gary's driveway, right where it would be most annoying. I left a nice big pile at the curb in front of Susan's house, making it nearly impossible for her to get her car out without a serious shoveling effort. And then, I saved the best for last. Brenda lived in one of the larger homes in the subdivision, a colonial-style house with a circular driveway and meticulously maintained landscaping. Her street, Oakwood Drive, was one of the first to get plowed because it was a main thoroughfare through the neighborhood. But that did not mean it was immune to snow problems. I made a dozen trips to Oakwood Drive, dumping load after load of snow at the entrance to Brenda Street. I piled it high, right in the middle of the road, creating a barrier that was nearly 3 feet tall and stretched across both lanes. It was not on her property, so she could not claim I was vandalizing her lawn. It was on the public street, which made it the city's problem, not hers. When I was done, I stood back and admired my handiwork. The pile was glorious, a monument to pettiness and frustration. Cars would have to navigate around it, and anyone trying to get to Brenda's house would have a fun time figuring out how to get past the obstacle I had created. I went home, showered, and collapsed on my couch, feeling more satisfied than I had in weeks. The next morning, my phone started ringing. It was Marcus. "Dude, did you see Oakwood Drive?" "What about it?" I asked, trying to sound innocent. "There is a massive pile of snow blocking the whole street. People are freaking out. They are saying the city must have screwed up when they plowed." I could not help but grin. Weird. Yeah, weird. Brenda is losing her mind. She is out there with a shovel trying to clear it herself. That image alone was worth all the effort. The snow pile on Oakwood Drive became the talk of the neighborhood. People speculated about how it got there, with most assuming it was an error by the city plows. The city, for their part, denied responsibility, saying their plows had not been on that street in the time frame when the pile appeared. Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the snow vandalism, as she called it. I did not attend, but Marcus filled me in later. Brenda had ranted for 20 minutes about how someone was deliberately sabotaging the neighborhood and demanded that the HOA hire private security to patrol the streets. The other board members looked uncomfortable, and no one took her seriously. Meanwhile, my own snow pile, the one on my lawn, was gone. The combination of melting and my secret relocation project had eliminated it entirely. I took photos of my pristine lawn and sent them to the HOA office with a sarcastic note. "Violation corrected. Please update your records." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I received another notice from the HOA. This one accused me of suspicious activity and potential vandalism related to the snow piles that had appeared around the neighborhood. It did not outright accuse me of anything specific, but the implication was clear. The notice demanded that I meet with the board to discuss the matter. I called Patricia again. "They are on to me." "Did they see you moving the snow?" "I do not think so." It was early in the morning and I was careful, but they are definitely suspicious. Without proof, they cannot do anything. It is all speculation. If they try to fine you or take action based on suspicion alone, that is harassment and we can fight it. I felt a little better, but I also knew I needed to be careful. Brenda was clearly out for blood, and I did not want to give her any ammunition. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday. I showed up with Patricia, which seemed to annoy Brenda immensely. She sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other board members, and glared at me like I was a criminal. "Mr. Fowler, We have reason to believe that you have been engaging in disruptive behavior, Brenda began. What behavior would that be? I asked calmly. The snow piles that appeared on Oakwood Drive and other streets around the neighborhood. We believe you are responsible. Do you have any proof of that? She hesitated. We have reports of a truck matching yours being seen in the area. A truck matching mine? You mean a pickup truck? In Buffalo? In winter? That narrows it down to about 10,000 vehicles. Patricia leaned forward. Miss Patterson, unless you have concrete evidence that my client engaged in wrongdoing, these accusations are baseless and could constitute harassment. Brenda's face turned red. He has been antagonistic toward the HOA since the beginning of this dispute. Antagonistic, I said. I appealed a bogus fine using the proper channels. You ignored my appeal and added more penalties. If anyone has been antagonistic, it is you. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. Gary, the retired accountant, spoke up. Brenda, maybe we should reconsider the original fine. It does seem like this has gotten out of hand. The fine is justified, Brenda snapped. Based on what? Gary asked. The snow is gone now. It melted just like everyone said it would. What is the point of pursuing this? The point is that rules are rules and they must be enforced. Even when they are interpreted unfairly, I asked. Brenda stood up. This meeting is over. Mr. Fowler, you will receive a bill for the outstanding fines. If you do not pay, we will place a lien on your property. Patricia stood as well. If you place a lien, we will file a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of power. I guarantee you that will cost the HOA far more than $600 in legal fees. Brenda stormed out of the room. The other board members looked at each other awkwardly. Susan, the realtor, approached me. For what it is worth, I think this is ridiculous. I will talk to the others and see if we can override her decision. I appreciate that, I said. Over the next few days, Susan reached out to the other board members and built a coalition to challenge Brenda. It turned out that I was not the only one who had issues with her leadership. Gary and Tom both had their own grievances, and Jennifer, the school teacher, was tired of the constant drama. At the next board meeting, which I did not attend, they voted to rescind my fine. Susan called me afterward to give me the news. It is done. The fine is gone, and we are updating the bylaws to clarify the snow removal policy so this does not happen again. Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate it. No problem. And just between you and me, Brenda is on thin ice. A lot of people are unhappy with how she has been running things. That made me feel good, but I also knew Brenda was not going to let this go easily. I was right. A few days later, Brenda showed up at my door again. This time, she was not holding a folder. She was just standing there, arms crossed, looking furious. You think you are so clever, she said. I do not know what you are talking about. You humiliated me in front of the board. I defended myself against an unfair fine. If that humiliated you, that is on you. You moved that snow, I know you did. Prove it. She stepped closer, her voice low and threatening. You have no idea who you are messing with. Is that a threat? She did not answer. She just turned and walked back to her car. I immediately called Patricia and told her about the encounter. She is escalating, Patricia said. Document everything. If she threatens you again, we need to consider getting a restraining order. I did not think it would come to that, but I started keeping detailed notes of every interaction. Spring arrived, and the snow finally melted completely. The neighborhood returned to normal, or as normal as it could be with Brenda still in charge of the HOA. I kept my head down and avoided her as much as possible, but then, in late April, something unexpected happened. I received a call from Dorothy, the older woman who had supported me at the original meeting. Vincent, you need to hear this. Brenda has been embezzling money from the HOA. What? Gary, the accountant, has been going through the books. There are thousands of dollars unaccounted for, and it all traces back to Brenda. She has been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses. I could hardly believe it. Are you serious? Completely. Gary is reporting it to the police. I thought you should know. I thanked Dorothy and hung up, feeling a mix of shock and vindication. Brenda had been so focused on petty power plays that she had gotten careless with the finances. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The police launched an investigation, and it quickly became clear that Brenda had been siphoning money from the HOA for years. She had used the funds to pay for vacations, home renovations, and even her car payments. The total amount was over $40,000. Brenda was arrested in early May. I was not there to see it, but Marcus told me it was quite the spectacle. She had screamed and cried, insisting that she had done nothing wrong, that it was all a misunderstanding. The police did not care. They put her in handcuffs and took her away. The HOA held an emergency meeting to elect a new president. Susan was chosen, and she immediately set about cleaning up the mess Brenda had left behind. The bylaws were revised, the finances were audited, and a new system of checks and balances was put in place to prevent future abuses of power. As for me, I was just glad to have my life back. The fine was gone, the snow was gone, and Brenda was gone. I could finally enjoy my home without worrying about ridiculous violations and petty tyrants. One evening in June, I was sitting on my porch with a beer, watching the sunset when Marcus walked over. "Can you believe all that actually happened?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "Honestly, no. It feels like a bad movie. You are a legend, man." "People are still talking about the snow piles on Oakwood Drive," I laughed. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "Sure you do not." He clinked his beer bottle against mine. "Seriously, though, you stood up to her when no one else would. That took guts." "I just did not want to pay a bogus fine. It was more than that. You showed everyone that Brenda was not untouchable, and look what happened. She is in jail now, and the HOA is actually functional for the first time in years." I thought about that. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe my petty act of rebellion had been the catalyst for something bigger. Brenda Patterson was eventually convicted of embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to repay the money she had stolen. The story made the local news, and Meadowbrook Heights became somewhat infamous for a while. But eventually, things settled down. The neighborhood moved on, the HOA functioned smoothly under Susan's leadership, and life returned to normal. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the best way to deal with a tyrant is to stand your ground, document everything, and maybe, just maybe, redirect a little snow when no one is looking. Winter came around again, and when the first big snowstorm hit, I cleared my driveway and piled the snow neatly on my lawn. This time, there were no fines, no threats, no drama. Just snow doing what snow does in Buffalo, and that was exactly how it should be. The following spring brought more changes to Meadowbrook Heights. Susan proved to be an excellent HOA president, focusing on practical improvements rather than petty enforcement. She organized neighborhood cleanup days, negotiated better rates for landscaping services, and actually listened to homeowners when they had concerns. It was refreshing. I ran into Gary at the grocery store one Saturday morning. He was loading bags into his car when he spotted me and waved me over. "Vincent, I have been meaning to talk to you," he said. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not standing up to Brenda sooner. I knew she was interpreting the bylaws unfairly, and I should have said something during that first meeting. Instead, I just sat there." "You voted to rescind the fine eventually. That is what matters." "Still, I should have had more backbone. When I started going through the books and found all those discrepancies, I realized how out of control she had gotten. If you had not fought back, who knows how long it would have continued. I appreciate that, Gary. Really. We talked for a few more minutes, and he mentioned that the HOA was planning a community barbecue for the 4th of July. It sounded like fun, and I told him I would be there. The barbecue turned out to be a huge success. Nearly every household in Meadowbrook Heights showed up, and for the first time in years, people actually seemed to enjoy being part of the community. There were grills going, kids running around, and a general atmosphere of celebration. Dorothy, the older woman who had first tipped me off about the embezzlement, found me near the dessert table. She was wearing a red, white, and blue sundress and had a huge smile on her face. "Vincent, dear, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you did. This neighborhood is so much better now. I did not do much. I just refused to pay an unfair fine. You did more than you realize. You inspired people to speak up. After you stood your ground, others felt brave enough to voice their complaints about Brenda. That is what led to the investigation." I had not thought about it that way, but maybe she was right. Sometimes all it takes is one person to say enough for others to find their courage. Marcus walked up with his wife, Kelly, and their 2 kids. "Hey man, great party, right?" "Yeah, it is nice to see everyone getting along." Susan really turned things around. I heard she is planning some updates to the playground too. That would be great. The equipment is pretty old. We stood there chatting, watching the kids play and enjoying the warm summer evening. It felt good to be part of a community that actually functioned like a community, rather than a dictatorship. As the sun began to set, Susan gathered everyone around for a short speech. She thanked the volunteers who had helped organize the event, talked about some upcoming projects, and then surprised everyone by presenting me with a small plaque. "I want to take a moment to recognize Vincent Fowler," she said, gesturing for me to come forward. Vincent stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. His actions led to important changes in how our HOA operates, and we are all better off because of it. This plaque is a small token of our appreciation. I felt my face flush as everyone started clapping. I took the plaque, which read, "To Vincent Fowler for courage and integrity. Meadowbrook Heights HOA 2025. "Thank you," I said, not really sure what else to say. I just did not want to pay $600 for snow. Everyone laughed and the moment passed. But as I walked back to Marcus and Kelly, I felt a genuine sense of pride. Not just for fighting the fine, but for being part of a community that had learned to stand up for itself. The summer passed peacefully. I worked, hung out with friends, and enjoyed not having to worry about HOA drama. The playground upgrades Susan had mentioned were completed in August, and they looked fantastic. The kids in the neighborhood loved them. In September, I got a letter in the mail from Patricia Monahan, the lawyer who had helped me fight the fine. Inside was a news clipping about Brenda's sentencing, along with a handwritten note. "Vincent, thought you might want to see this. Justice was served. Thanks for being a great client. If you ever need legal help again, I hope you will call me first, but let us hope it does not come to that. Best wishes, Patricia." I read the article, which detailed Brenda's conviction and sentencing. She had pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud, and the judge had not been lenient. 3 years in prison, full restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. It was a fitting end to her reign of terror. I tucked the article into a drawer and moved on with my life. As fall arrived and the leaves began to change, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. It had been frustrating, infuriating, and occasionally absurd, but it had also been a valuable lesson in standing up for yourself. Too often, People let petty tyrants get away with abuse because fighting back seems too difficult or costly. But sometimes, the fight is worth it, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who might be victimized in the future. The first snow of the season fell in early November, just a dusting that melted by noon. I looked out my window at the white-covered lawn and could not help but smile. Snow had been the catalyst for everything, the ridiculous reason Brenda had decided to target me. And in a way, it had been her downfall. If she had not been so obsessed with enforcing petty rules, no one would have scrutinized her leadership closely enough to discover the embezzlement. Winter arrived in full force in December, and Buffalo lived up to its reputation. We got hit with storm after storm, and the snow piles returned. But this time, there were no fines, no threats, no drama. Just neighbors helping each other shovel, sharing tips on the best snow blowers, and commiserating about the cold. On Christmas Eve, I was finishing up some last-minute shopping when I ran into Susan at the mall. She was loaded down with bags and looked frazzled but happy. "Vincent, hi. Doing some last-minute shopping too?" "Yeah, I always wait until the last minute. How are things with the HOA?" "Really good, actually. We have had 0 complaints in the past few months, which is a record. And we are planning some fun events for next year, including a spring festival and a neighborhood yard sale." "That sounds great. You have done an amazing job, Susan." "Thanks. I could not have done it without support from people like you." "Speaking of which, have you thought about joining the board? We have an opening, and I think you would be a great addition." I hesitated. The idea of being on the HOA board had never appealed to me, especially after everything that had happened with Brenda. But Susan was different. She was reasonable, fair, and genuinely cared about making the community better. "Let me think about it," I said. "No pressure, just consider it. We meet once a month and it is pretty low-key." I told her I would, and we parted ways over the holiday break. I did think about it. Being on the board would give me a say in how the HOA was run, and it would ensure that someone like Brenda never took control again. It was also a way to give back to the community that had supported me during the fight. In January, I called Susan and told her I was interested. She was thrilled and said she would nominate me at the next meeting. A week later, I was officially a member of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA board. My first few meetings were a learning experience. There was a lot more to running an HOA than I had realized, from managing budgets to coordinating maintenance schedules. But it was also rewarding. I got to know my neighbors better, and I had a real voice in decisions that affected all of us. One of my first initiatives was to propose a revision to the snow removal policy. I worked with Tom, the IT guy, to draft new language that was clear, reasonable, and did not leave room for arbitrary interpretation. The policy stated that homeowners were required to keep driveways and sidewalks clear for safety reasons, but that snow accumulation on lawns was acceptable as long as it did not create hazards or block public rights of way. There was no mention of height limits or aesthetic standards. The board approved the new policy unanimously, and it was added to the bylaws in February. As winter turned to spring, I realized how much my life had changed in the past year. I had gone from a guy who just wanted to be left alone to an active member of the community, helping to shape its future. It was not something I had ever planned, but it felt right. Marcus joked that I had become the thing I had fought against, but I knew that was not true. I was nothing like Brenda. I did not use my position to bully or control people. I used it to make sure everyone was treated fairly, and that the HOA served the community rather than the other way around. One afternoon in April, I was working in my yard when a moving truck pulled up to the house next door. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had moved to Florida, and the house had been on the market for a few months. I was curious to see who the new neighbors would be. A young couple got out of a car behind the truck, followed by a toddler and a golden retriever. The woman waved at me and I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I am Vincent. I live next door. Welcome to Meadowbrook Heights." "Thanks. I am Emily and this is my husband Jake and our daughter Lily, and this big guy is Max." She gestured to the dog who was wagging his tail enthusiastically. "Nice to meet you all. If you need anything, just let me know. The neighborhood is pretty friendly." "That is great to hear," Jake said. "We were a little worried about the HOA. We have heard horror stories." I laughed. "We had some issues in the past, but things are much better now. The current board is really reasonable." Emily looked relieved. "That is good to know. We just want a quiet place to raise our daughter. You will like it here. Lots of families, good schools, and plenty of parks." We chatted for a few more minutes, and I helped them carry a few boxes inside. It felt good to welcome new neighbors and know that they would not have to deal with the kind of nonsense I had endured. As spring turned to summer, life in Meadowbrook Heights continued to improve. The community felt more cohesive, the HOA ran smoothly, and people actually seemed happy to live here. Susan organized another 4th of July barbecue, which was even bigger and better than the previous year. One evening in late July, I was sitting on my porch with a cold drink, watching the fireflies when Dorothy walked by with her little dog. "Evening, Vincent," she called out. "Hey, Dorothy. Nice night, is not it? Beautiful." I was just thinking about how different things are now compared to last year. "Yeah, it is like night and day." She stopped at the edge of my lawn. "You know, I have lived in this neighborhood for 30 years and the past year has been the best it has ever been. We have you to thank for that." "I did not do it alone. A lot of people stepped up." "Maybe, but you were the spark. You reminded us that we did not have to put up with being treated poorly. That is a powerful thing." I did not know what to say, so I just smiled. Dorothy gave me a little wave and continued her walk. As I sat there in the warm evening air, I thought about everything that had happened. It had started with a ridiculous fine over snow, something so petty and absurd that it almost seemed comical. But it had turned into something much bigger, a fight for fairness and accountability that had ultimately made the entire community better. And yeah, maybe I had redirected some snow onto Brenda Street out of spite. It was not my proudest moment, but it had felt damn good at the time. More importantly, it had been a turning point, a moment when I decided I was not going to be pushed around anymore. Looking back, I would not change a thing. Well, maybe I would have moved the snow at night instead of early morning to be even more careful, but otherwise, no regrets. The summer of 2026 was one of the best I could remember. I spent time with friends, went to neighborhood events, and actually enjoyed being part of the HOA. It was a far cry from the dark days of fighting with Brenda, and I was grateful for it. In August, I got an email from Gary with the subject line, "You will not believe this." I opened it and found a link to a news article. Brenda Patterson had been released from prison early for good behavior. She had served about a year and was now on parole. I felt a momentary flash of concern. Would she come back to Meadowbrook Heights? Would she try to cause trouble again? Gary's email continued. "Do not worry. Part of her parole conditions is that she cannot hold any leadership position in an HOA or community organization. She also sold her house here and moved to Arizona. We are finally rid of her for good." I breathed a sigh of relief. Brenda was gone and she was not coming back. That chapter was truly closed. The rest of the summer passed peacefully, and before I knew it, fall had arrived again. The leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air took on that crisp quality that I loved. Halloween came and went, followed by Thanksgiving, and then it was December again. The first major snowstorm of the season hit just before Christmas. I spent a morning clearing my driveway, piling the snow neatly on my lawn, just like I had done a year earlier. But this time, there was no anxiety, no waiting for a violation notice, no anger, just the satisfaction of a job well done. Emily and Jake, my new neighbors, were outside with their daughter building a snowman. I walked over to say hi. "First big snow in the new house," I said. Jake laughed. "Yeah, we are not used to this much. We moved from North Carolina. You will get the hang of it. If you need to borrow a snow blower or anything, just let me know." "Thanks, Vincent. Everyone here has been so helpful. It is a great neighborhood." I looked around at the snow-covered houses, the kids playing in the yards, the neighbors helping each other clear driveways. It really was a great neighborhood. Not perfect, but what place is? The important thing was that people cared about each other and worked together to make it better. As I walked back to my house, I thought about how much had changed in the past 2 years. A ridiculous fine over snow had set off a chain of events that had exposed corruption, ousted a tyrant, and brought a community together. It was proof that standing up for what is right, even over something small, can have a ripple effect that goes far beyond what you might imagine. I went inside, made myself a hot chocolate, and settled onto the couch. Through the window, I could see the snow falling gently, covering everything in a fresh white blanket. It was beautiful and peaceful, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. The snow pile on my lawn would melt eventually, just like it always did, but the changes in Meadowbrook Heights would last. That was what mattered, and if anyone ever tried to find me for snow again, well, let us just say I knew exactly what to do. The holidays passed and the new year began. I continued serving on the HOA board, working with Susan and the others to keep the community running smoothly. We tackled projects big and small, from repaving the community center parking lot to organizing a neighborhood watch program. It was fulfilling work, and I was glad to be part of it. In February, exactly 2 years after the original snow incident, Buffalo got hit with another massive storm. It was almost eerie how similar it was to the one that had started everything. 3 feet of snow in 2 days, temperatures plummeting, and the city plows working overtime. I cleared my driveway and piled the snow on my lawn, creating another impressive 4-foot pile. I took a picture of it and sent it to Marcus with the caption, "Deja vu." He responded immediately, "Do not even think about it." I laughed. I had no intention of redirecting snow this time. There was no need. No one was going to find me, no one was going to harass me, and the neighborhood was functioning just fine. But I did keep the picture as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes when life buries you under a pile of absurdity, you have to dig yourself out. And sometimes, you have to redirect that absurdity right back where it came from. Spring arrived once more, bringing with it new growth and new beginnings. The neighborhood continued to thrive, and I continued to be an active part of it. I had gone from someone who just wanted to be left alone to someone who was helping shape the community's future. It was not a role I had sought, but it was one I had grown into, and it all started with snow. Looking back, I could see the absurdity of the whole situation. A fine for snow. In Buffalo, in February. It was so ridiculous that it almost seemed like fiction. But it had been real, and it had been a turning point in my life and in the life of Meadowbrook Heights. I learned that standing up to injustice, no matter how small, matters. I learned that communities are only as good as the people who are willing to fight for them. And I learned that sometimes, a little creative problem solving, like redirecting snow onto HOA streets, can be the catalyst for real change. As I sat on my porch one evening in late May, watching another beautiful sunset, I felt grateful. Grateful for the fight, grateful for the friends I had made, grateful for the community I was part of. It had been a wild ride, but I would not trade it for anything, and the next time it snowed, I would be ready. Shovel in hand, truck gassed up, and a smile on my face, because in Buffalo, snow is just part of life, and in Meadowbrook Heights we handle it together as a community should. The snow fine incident became a story that people told, a legend of sorts. New residents heard about it and would sometimes ask me if it was true. I always confirmed it, usually with a laugh. It was a reminder that even in the most frustrating situations, there is often a way to fight back, and that sometimes fighting back is exactly what you should do. Years from now, when people talk about Meadowbrook Heights and how it became one of the best neighborhoods in Buffalo, they might mention the improved amenities, the strong community spirit, and the fair and reasonable HOA. But those of us who lived through it will know the truth. It all started with a ridiculous fine, a stubborn homeowner, and a whole lot of snow. And that is a story worth telling,